everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for Ask the Expert North Texas. I'm Kristen Diaz.
I'm David Rankin. Tonight, 7 of the candidates in the Republican presidential nomination pool go head-to-head in another debate. This is the second debate on the schedule, and it comes from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. On today's Ask the Expert, we're joined by Mark Jones. He's our political science expert from Rice University. He is in the KRLE Zoom room. Mark, thank you so much for the time.
Oh, my pleasure.
So there are only 7 candidates on the stage tonight. Is that the only real difference to what we can expect compared to the first debate where we had 8?
There's not much difference, and I think the elephant in the room is still there, or better said, not there, and that Donald Trump will not be president at the debate, and therefore it becomes a much less interesting affair.
What were some of the topics that weren't discussed last time that we'll be hearing more on this time?
Well, I think the government shutdown is going to be one that there'll be a big focus on, simply because it's occurring on the eve of the debate. And it's something that divides the Republican Party between more pragmatic conservatives who view it as a bad thing, and people like Donald Trump, who seems to be stoking on those really conservative Republicans in the House who are blocking up and gumming up the whole system. Immigration is going to continue to be a major issue. And the Ukraine, I think, will get more coverage, although both received coverage in the prior debate.
I'm also looking at some predictions about this debate tonight, and that the topic of abortion is possibly going to come up because there seems to be a little bit of a divide.
Right, that could come up, and particularly related to the heartbeat legislation that President Trump has come out against, criticizing Governor DeSantis, and Governor DeSantis, as well as a large number of the Republican candidates, have sided on the side of life, even in regard to heartbeat. So there is, I think, an issue there. I'm just not sure who's going to be punching in favor of Trump's position on the heartbeat legislation, perhaps Vivek Ramaswamy or maybe Nikki Haley.
I feel like the first debate kind of people went in with the notion of what they thought they were going to expect, and it ended up being some different names that took the spotlight. How do we think that's going to play for certain candidates this time?
Well, time is running out for particularly Ron DeSantis. He has to do something to reverse the decline of his candidacy, because while he is technically the second place candidate, he's dropped from being about 10 to 15 points away from Donald Trump to being more like 30 to 40 points away from Donald Trump. But at the same time, none of the other candidates have emerged as a potential replacement for DeSantis. I think that's one of the things that's going to be happening tonight. We're seeing Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy trying to take the mantle of second place away from DeSantis, with the hope that if they do that, then maybe some of the money and more institutional support that DeSantis is receiving will come their way. DeSantis's goal, of course, is to keep them from occupying that second place position and trying to bolster himself as representing a real credible rival to Donald Trump.
Again, with the absence of the former president, do the voters really care if he's there or not, or are they just in lockstep with the former president no matter what?
Well, at least all the poll numbers we have show that an overwhelming majority of Republican primary voters, or likely Republican primary voters, between 50 and 60%, are supportive of Trump. And that support it's not growing anymore, but it hasn't been eroded by his indictments. And until one of these other candidates can catch fire, the most likely scenario is Trump will be the GOP nominee. They'll still hold out hope that somehow maybe in Iowa, one of them can pull a rabbit out of their hat and defeat the former president, and therefore launch themselves into sort of being a potential rival. But right now, I think that's the only real scenario where Trump seems threatened. Once we get beyond the early primary and caucus states, Trump's lead right now is insurmountable.
You know, we focus on the presidency, but even, just all of the people that are going to be on this debate are going to have their own following from their own states. And it's also important that they do well for the face of the Republican Party as well, right? I mean, how much of this is also focusing on just the Republican Party and giving their credibility in certain areas and giving their respect to the party for the entire nation when we have a lot of drama going on?
Well, I mean, it is important to have those Republican voices speaking, at least other voices than we're hearing, say, from Congress. And many of those candidates have ulterior motives for running. They're not necessarily running to be the next president of the United States. They're either running for a cabinet position in the Trump administration, they're running for essentially future financial gain, or they're running perhaps to be Trump's vice presidential nominee. Then there are others that are running more to vindicate themselves, such as Chris Christie and Mike Pence, even though they have no hope whatsoever of victory.
Let's talk about the timing of this thing, because the debates are almost 4 months before anyone even comes close to casting a ballot. Do these debates come too early?
Well, they're a good way to sort of winnow the field. One of the problems we've had in recent years is having too many candidates. And so they at least provide a way to get to voters a more manageable selection or menu of candidates as we approach Iowa and New Hampshire. And they help the party avoid, at least the Republican Party, avoid having too fragmented a field and making it difficult for voters to know who the actual frontrunners are and who are the candidates that have no hope. So they do provide a good process. It's just this cycle, it's a much less productive process because the person who is the clear frontrunner simply isn't participating in the debates, meaning there's no opportunity to attack them, no opportunity to force them to take a stance on perhaps unpopular issues. And with Trump's absence, the ratings for these debates are much lower than they would otherwise be if he was up there on the stage.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. And speaking of ratings, I mean, how effective are these debates at all when it comes to really educating the public on the actual potential candidate?
They become much less effective if people don't watch them. And the primary effect of the debate will be in the media coverage of it tomorrow and the next day, as well as today, because an overwhelming majority of Republican primary voters are not going to watch the debate because President Trump's not on the ballot. And if you're on the East Coast, it's a relatively late time in the evening. So overall, I think it'll be the media coverage the day after that will have the effect, if there's an effect in terms of the candidates. For people like DeSantis and Ron DeSantis and Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, the more credible candidates, they're nearing the end. They need something to happen to change the dynamics because the current status quo is taking us to a Trump nomination for the GOP and being the candidate to run against Joe Biden next year.
How big of a shadow is there since they're holding this debate at the Reagan Library, and Reagan Republicans are a different breed than the Republican Party we've seen today?
It is. I mean, most Republicans will sort of harken back to Reagan and try to base what they're doing based on what Reagan did. But the Republican Party today has nothing to do whatsoever with the Reagan Republicans of the 1980s. Reagan was a pragmatist who effectively utilized his position as president to push conservative policies as far as he could. But he had the goal of actually passing policies and pushing through legislation and making a real change, not trying to essentially score points and engage in sound bites and rhetoric, but not have any real impact on policy. So the Reagan Party, it's really questionable if Ronald Reagan would be even welcome in today's Republican Party. All signs are he would not, because he was a pragmatic conservative who valued getting 80% of what he wanted, but getting it passed versus asking for 100% and not getting anything.
Mark Jones from Rice University. Mark, thank you so much as always.
No, thank you.